Welcome to the 235th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with J.D. Horn, author of the Witching Savannah series. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is J.D. Horn, the author of the Witching Savannah series. The latest book in the series, Gilo, has just been released. J.D., welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Well, can you read the first 2 or 3 pages from your new novel, Gilo?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Little setup. It takes place in Savannah from the years of 1932 to 1960, so it's a little bit historical. Savannah, Georgia, August 1932. The old woman couldn't have picked a hotter day to get herself buried, Jesse Wills whispered as he wiped his brow. A nervous smile came to his lips. The secrets of living and dying would forever remain a mystery to him, but he knew one thing for certain, and that was if his grandmother were alive to hear him speak of her as the old woman, she'd be chasing him around this here boneyard with a willow switch. Sorry there, Nana, he mumbled under his breath, not so sure he shared his wife Betty's Christian certainty as to the final disposition of the human soul. If anyone could figure out how to hold on to a piece of this world after passing, it would be his grandmother, Tuesday Jackson. She'd been a tough old gal, all right, up to the end, his Nana. Barely 5 foot tall and light enough for a good wind to topple, Nana Tuesday had been tough enough to best Joe Louis in any fight. A fool might have messed with Tuesday Jackson once, but he'd never do it twice. Jesse himself had tried her patience more than that, of course, but he was not just any old fool. He had been her favorite grandbaby. Now she was gone, being placed in Laurel Grove South Cemetery's earth, one grave over from where Jesse's daddy lay, right next to the plot his mom had reserved for herself. It wasn't the old way. It used to be his daddy would lie with his own people, near the grave of his own mother. But his daddy's mom had been buried out on St. Helena's Island, and Jesse's mama wanted her husband near, where she could visit him. Besides, the world had changed, at least in some ways. Jesse's cousins had invited their minister, young Pastor Jones, the preacher at Wildwood Congregational, to officiate a graveside service. Nana had never darkened the church's door in her life, so it didn't seem right dragging her in there now, when she no longer had any say over the matter. No, Nana Tuesday had never been a church-going lady. When visiting out on Defusky or Hilton Head, she would go to the woods to do her praying, or, on the rare occasion, to a praise house. For the most part, though, she had preferred to keep her religion between herself and her Maker, not seeing it as being anyone else's business. It did no harm, though, in Jesse's eyes, to let the fiery preacher bring his comfort to those members of his family who couldn't reconcile his Nana's beliefs and practices with their own faith. Could have been worse, anyway. His cousin Joe had gotten all caught up with Father Divine, ended up handing over everything he had to the man except the very clothes on his back. No, Pastor Jones was certainly the lesser of those two evils. Still, Jesse began his own private prayer that the young fellow would be fast about burning off the steam he built up. Jesse and his little family hung back on the periphery, ceding the area nearest the grave to his uncles, aunties, and cousins, the combined mass of them forming a swaying and waving, mostly wide-clad circle around it. He loved his Nana as much, if not more than any of them, but there had been no love lost between his wife and grandmother, and the whole family knew it. Best to keep Betty back where her comments stood a better chance of going unheard, or at least unheeded. So, it's the opening to the heroine's great-grandmother's funeral.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about Gilo or the Witching Savannah series yet, how would you describe your new novel?
I would describe it as a standalone prequel to the series. The series itself is about a family of witches in Savannah. It's a fun read with a lot of nuance to it, I would say. And Gilo is the main 3 books in the series are contemporary, but Gilo steps back to take a look at one of the favorite characters from the series was an octogenarian woman named Gilo. This steps back to look at her life from when she was a baby to around the age of 28 when she's become a young mother herself.
Great. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing the Witching Savannah series?
Honestly, the Joseph Campbell's monomyth. I know this sounds a little bit intellectual versus a gut kind of inspiration, but I love Joseph Campbell, and I wanted to set out to build a story based on, at least loosely, on his monomyth, the hero's journey. And I wanted to do it with a young woman. So Mercy, who is the heroine of the first three books, the line, the source, and the void are her hero's journey.
Great. And what was your writing journey prior to writing the Witching Savannah series? Had you been writing fiction before?
I have. I went to college with the beginnings of a manuscript, probably around 150 rough pages. Back when, you still wrote on a typewriter. And I went off to college with those. I ended up deciding to study comparative world literature instead of creative writing. And what happened was that I got discouraged because I was judging the work of a then 17-year-old versus, the masters like Dostoevsky. I'm like, no comparison. And I just convinced myself that I would never be a writer. So I threw that manuscript away. And it was probably a good 10, 15 years later that I encountered, I'm always a big reader, but I ended up coming across Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. And something about his books spoke to me because they were the way he dealt with very solid and complex issues in an almost light and breezy way that belied the seriousness of what he was writing about. And I thought, everything doesn't have to be a Russian drama, huh? And maybe I can do this too. And so that inspired me, and I wrote my first novel, which is still unpublished, although I still have not given up the faith on that poor book. And I wrote it. I went through the period of trying to find an agent, find a publisher, was devastated by that process, and ended up walking away for another several years. My spouse found the manuscript, encouraged me to take another look at it. I did. I ended up, this time, the manuscript got me an agent. We circulated it. It once again did not find a publisher, but I got notes this time from different publishers, like 3 different editors who were kind enough to take the time to say, we really liked your book. This is why we aren't buying it from you. And so I thought, okay, I can either be discouraged again, or I can take these notes and try to see if I can write something that these publishers would want. That book was The Line, and it sold within 6 weeks.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. And so what is it about the setting of Savannah that intrigued you? And I wondered if you've done a lot of historical research about the history of Savannah.
I started off, I'd originally intended, and thank God I did not carry through with this. I had originally intended to set The Line in a city or a small city that I would have made up myself. I was going to call it Taylor's Ferry. And I kept writing this, and it would not, there was no life in it. It just kept falling flat. And I kept thinking about, well, what is missing in this? And I'm like, well, I would like it to have this certain aspect. I would like to have it that aspect. And after a while, I kept thinking, that kind of sounds like Savannah. That kind of sounds like Savannah. And so I thought, maybe I should just suck it up and go with Savannah. And thank God I did, because Savannah itself became such a character, such an entity in its own right in the series. And yes, I have done a lot of boots on the ground research in that city, and I've spent far too many hours in the main library going through like old newspaper microfiche. And yeah, I love doing research. I do, and I find I'm nerdy enough to find it a lot of fun. And what most people don't realize when you talk about research is that it's like an iceberg, because you have all these great things you were dying to use that you can never work in, including the fact that someday I will probably find some way of using this. Is that there is an unexploded nuclear bomb off the coast of Savannah, off the coast of Georgia near Savannah, and that's something I was so certain I was going to find a way to work in, but I had to let it go for the story's sake. So it's the danger of doing a little bit too much research sometimes.
Yeah. So given your success with getting the Witching Savannah series published, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who might be listening and are interested in writing their own novels or short stories?
I do have very serious advice about this. My advice is that you have to realize that no matter how good your story may be, how you feel about it, you cannot edit your own work. You cannot do it. And I would advise anyone who has a manuscript to engage a professional editor if they can afford it. It is an investment. It is not inexpensive. And you do not want to use anyone off the internet who's just hung a placard saying, "Hey, I'm an editor." You want to get recommendations. You might want to have them look at maybe 10 pages first, pay them to do that. Don't ask them to do it for free because they're not going to do it. But, pay them for like 10 pages, maybe 2 chapters or something to make sure that they're doing the level and the kind of work that you want. If you can't afford that, you have to get involved in some sort of writing critique group. And they're on the internet. You can make friends on the internet who will help you if you live if you don't live in a city where it's low, where you can find someone locally. But you have to have other people read and critique your work. And yes, it hurts like hell. And I wish I could say it gets easier, but quite often it doesn't get easier. So there's something you'll be so in love with that your editor's going to be saying, "Yeah, I get that you like this, but it's got to go." So that's my advice. You have to make sure that your work is polished, and you have to make sure that it is as free from mistakes and typos as possible, that there are no plot holes as best as you can do. And that is before you even go forward to an agent. That's before you try to get a publisher. And certainly if you are self-publishing, and I have friends who do self-publishing and they've done really well with it, you have to get an editor then. You have to make sure that it has been professionally edited, because readers will, if you put one book out there that, readers say, "Oh, this wasn't well edited," they're not going to come back for your second book. So keep the long goal in line, get someone to read your work, be accepting of critiques. It's really hard. Sometimes, but make sure that you have people who know what they're talking about, because everyone's a critic, right? Mm-hmm. But you need someone who actually is experienced in doing true critiques of your work, so you can put your best foot forward.
Great. Well, when you sit down to write, are there ever days that you need to do something to jumpstart the process?
Oh gosh, it's funny you ask that, 'cause I am at that point right now. Gilo has just come out, and I've got to admit that I'm kind of at a loss. I have 2 different projects that are, well, actually 3 that are vying for my attention, and I keep just sitting there watching television. So I've kind of got to figure out the answer to that. Normally, in the past, I treat working like a job, that I just sit down and you write until the inspiration comes. And I don't know what's up with me right now. I got to get my tuchus back into a chair and just actually start writing. I think part of the thing is that when you have a book come out and you know that people are reading it and expressing opinions about it, for me at least, that gets in my head a bit. And so when I sit down to write the next thing, I'm already worried about what people, a year and a half, 2 years down the road are going to be thinking.
Gotcha. So are there books and authors that inspire your own writing?
Oh gosh, I mean, if you just look at the series title for my series, Witching Savannah, that obviously shows that Anne Rice was a huge influence, because her Witching Hour was just seminal in so many ways, as well as her interview with a vampire. I would also say Charlene Harris, because I love Charlene Harris. Her books, her Suki Sukkhaus books, are very different from mine, but you'll see that there's an influence. And again, Armistead Maupin, I love the way he manages to deal with very serious issues in ways that make them more palatable and easy to read. Then of course, I mean, like there are the old guys like John Steinbeck, I love. And probably my favorite book is Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master of Margarita, which is a dark fantasy that is funny, touching, horrifying, and wonderful. And so if anyone hasn't read that, I would definitely recommend get the Mira Ginsburg translation. It's about Satan going to Moscow to throw a cocktail party. But it's absolutely the most beautiful book I've ever seen. It's also about writing. It's about a writer who's burned his manuscript. So,
and what was the name of that again? I didn't catch that.
The Master and Margarita. It's by Mikhail Mikhail Bulgakov, Bulgakov. That book, I love that book. I read it every couple of years.
Great. So where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you and your Witching Savannah series?
Well, the easiest place is probably just witchingsavannah.com. It has everything about that series, and it also talks about a few other writing projects that I have. Like I had another unrelated book come out last year called Chivalry, which is very different from the Witching Savannah series. Chivalry is full-on horror, and it's also set in the 1950s, so it's a bit historical as well, but it's about a vampire in Mississippi, and these are not bright, shiny, happy characters. So if you want a book with relatable characters that you're going to love, don't read Chivalry. If you want some complex characters who you might get a little scare from, go to Chivalry.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with J.D. Horn, author of the Witching Savannah series. Gilo, his latest novel, is out now, so go grab a copy. And J.D., thanks for doing this interview.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Not since flying reindeer have the holidays seen something so amazing. Just in time to make selfie-ready holiday hair easy. Introducing the do-it-all styling tools for glam holiday hair. The holidays are happier with glam hair. And the Knot Doctor all-in-one dryer brushes from Conair makes it easy. Detangle, dry, and style in one step. No elf needed. The Knot Doctor collection has a dryer brush for every hair type and style. The pink smoothing paddle dryer brush has Flexolite bristles for painless detangling and high-performance power for quick styling and smooth, shiny results. And the purple dryer brush comes with a bonus volumizing attachment to boost lift and volume at the roots. It's perfect for salon blowouts at home. And since they're ideal for every hair type and length, they make great gifts for everyone on your list who wants beautiful hair without the hassles. Shop the Knot Doctor dryer brushes at Conair.com or at your favorite retailers now.